Hello everyone. Today is International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And to mark this occasion, today we have three women researchers here with us in the studio who've been supported with EU funding. Valeria Nicolosi, who's a multiple ERC grant holder. Agnieszka Wykowska, equally an ERC Starting Grant holder. So ERC is our European Research Council. And Francisca dos Santos Martins, a recent laureate of the European Contest for Young Scientists. And of course, Carlos Moedas, our Commissioner for Research, Science and Innovation. So let's kick off this chat, and I'd like to hear from you first, Commissioner, why today's celebration is important for you.
Thank you very much, Lucia, and thank you very much for being here. It's a very good day for all of you and for us here in the Commission. I think, Lucia, there's two main reasons. One is about recognition, and the second one is about role models. And let me tell you about recognition. I think there's so much that we have to do still. I remember not far ago, I was reading in the New York Times an obituary of a woman called Yvonne Brill. And the first paragraph was Yvonne Brill used to do a very good, mean beef stroganoff. And she was always with her husband. She had 3 kids. She took care of the kids. She was wonderful. And then by the third paragraph, suddenly I realized that she was an amazing scientist. And that she had received a National Medal of Science in the US and all that. And I find myself thinking, my God, how is it possible that until the third, fourth paragraph, there was nothing about the story of this woman that wasn't a wonderful scientist. And so in my experience in these 4 or 5 years, I've met so many stories like this one that I think that we owe it to recognize women in a different way and to tell the stories. The second thing which I think is important for women and men is about having a role model. You know, when I started my career very young, I remember that meeting one of these headhunters, and he told me, you know, 2 things. I mean, one is about self-confidence, and another is about having a role model. And I think that we need more women as role models for other women, to inspire women. And I think that you are that. I mean, today you have these ERC grants, which are like having a mini Nobel Prize. So your role is not just research. It's how do we inspire, like, researchers like Francisca, that is very young, she's just like won this prize, to keep on doing. And I think that these 2 things for me are essential on this day. Recognition of women and also working on getting these role models. And I think the ERC should be and ought to be a school for those role models. And that it could be almost part of your contract. Like if you get a grant, you have to help other women. You know, and I think that is something that is always in my mind. So Lucia, I think that the importance of the day is obvious, but sometimes we have to structure and to tell people why is it important.
So perhaps you could now briefly tell us why you chose a scientific career and why you feel that today's discussion is so important. You choose? Who goes first?
I probably can start. I don't know, I chose a scientific career because I never actually thought about anything else, to be honest. I was inspired by my science teacher, in fact. I started loving science from the very, very early stage. I'd always been a very curious child. But then when I discovered chemistry in high school, I remember that was a spark. And I said, yes, I want to become a chemist. I want to become a scientist. And I chose the career that was natural for me. I loved science, and later on when I started studying university, I loved the background, and I thought, there's nothing better than becoming a scientist and a teacher as well, inspiring the new generations and show them that science can be fun.
I see a lot of nodding, so what's your experience?
I started with philosophy, actually, and that was because I remember being in high school, I was extremely interested in all those philosophical questions that were very deep and profound and that actually didn't have answers. So I went on studying philosophy, and it was fascinating. And then while studying philosophy, I came across philosophy of science and philosophy of mind. And then I realized that in philosophy, I'm missing empirical data, and I would like to answer certain questions with empirical data. So I went on to study cognitive neuroscience. And I think, as you said before, it's really curiosity that drives us mostly, and passion. And this is, I think science is part of our identity. It's something that you can't live without. And I always think, people will sometimes tell me, oh, why don't you take a break when you're on vacation? Why do you always work? But it's not work. It's really something that fascinates us, and we can't stop. Yeah. And I cannot imagine myself in any other role or any other job. And that's why I'm here. And I'm very happy that it worked out for me with the ERC funding, because this is the best possible funding for a researcher. You have all the freedom to explore your dream research, and you're really writing the grant is such a pleasure, because you're dreaming, and then when it comes true, then you can really pursue those scientific dreams. So I think being here today, I would like to encourage everyone, but women specifically on the day-to-day to apply for those grants, because it's really, really a great scheme.
Good to hear, Francisca.
Well, when I was little, I was a very curious child. You know, when a child is like 3, 4 years old, they're at that age when they're asking why. Everything needs a why. And I was never satisfied with the answers my mom gave me. I had to know more. So when I started studying science when I was in 7th grade, that was it. I just fell in love, just knowing there was so much out there that was known, and so much out there that we could still know. And I'm here today because I feel like, besides this being the Day of Women in Science, this is also the Day of Girls in Science. And I identify with that a lot, because I don't think I would pursue a career in investigation or in science, or pursue my passion with investigation and knowing more about things, if I hadn't been pushed to know more, to do this project. So I think it's important for everyone, especially girls. If they have a passion, they should pursue it from day one.
Mm-hmm. Carlos, this year, 2019, marks 20 years of EU policy to foster gender equality in research and innovation. Now, you as the commissioner in charge, what do you think we've achieved in these 20 years?
I think we have achieved so much. I think that if you think about Europe as getting out the best of what we have as Europeans, you see that in science, you see that in environment, you see that in all our policies for climate change, but you also see in women. And you know, not long ago I have these meetings with the advisory groups and experts, and we have this rule that for advisory groups we need 50% women sitting around the table. And one researcher from France told me, look, I mean, this was such a different meeting. Just having a table with 50% women made me feel different. So it was not about the questions or the discussion, was that it was different, because I'm used to be just the only one. And I thought, look, just something so easy to do, which to say, look, if I have experts around the table, I want 50% women, that makes a huge difference in the mood, in the conversation. And so the same goes to diversity. I think that we're not just talking about women, people of different credos, people that think differently. And we have this amazing diversity in Europe, and so we have to play that. And so I've said, look, we have the targets, and I think we have achieved that in terms of 40% in our panels. Each time there's an evaluation, there's at least 40% women. On the advisory groups, it's 50%. But it's not enough. We have to keep pushing. And that is extremely important. And so we have, since I've arrived, we've done now 6 editions of our Women's Innovators Prize, which every year we just choose one big, really innovator that is women. And so we do that every year. And that creates the recognition, creates the role model. And that's something that we did too very well. Then in terms of Europe, globally as Europe, I think that we have still a big problem, because you go to universities, and I'm an engineer myself, and when my age, I'm very old, there will be like 90% men. And then today is basically 50%. And that is in university. The problem you will encounter, Francisca, is that you get out of university and you think, looks good. I mean, men and women. But then you go into your career ladder, and each step up, there's less and less women, right? And so when you go to the top of the education, universities, the number of rectors or presidents in 2010 were like 16% were women, and today we are about to launch these she figures, which kind of like monitor the advance, and so we went up from 16 to 22%. But still, I mean, it's not normal. But the journey was done. I mean, and I think that we should also cherish the things we did, but especially cherish Europe. In a moment where I see all people around in Europe and the turmoil, the political turmoil, what is the role of Europe? I mean, if Europe was not there, I can tell you, I mean, these numbers in certain countries will be so far away. We've been always pushing over these, and I speak for my own country, from Portugal. I think Europe had a huge role of putting this on the agenda, of making it an important thing for the country, and that was Europe. So I think, Lucia, yes, bittersweet feeling, right? We went up and we did better, but we're very far from where we should be.
Well, let's hear the experience from our researchers. How have you seen things change over the past 20 years, or a little less in some cases? And have you felt the impact of EU support and recognition on your careers?
Well, definitely, being ERC grantees, that's one fantastic way of supporting researchers, and including women, and I think the ratio there is quite high of women in ERC grants. I think Europe has done quite a lot indeed for promoting women in science, and well, it's for me 20 years is like from being a student to becoming a PI, and I must say that I have experience only I have only good experiences, and it's been really I can't say that there have been like difficulties because I've been a woman in terms of policies or funding schemes in Europe. I think there's a bit still that to be done at the more kind of implicit societal level, because there's still a lot of implicit bias in society, and there's a lot of pressure on women. When a woman is full-time working mother, there is still a lot of judgments around and expectations that somehow it should be the woman who should finish her work earlier and go and pick up her child from daycare. And very often, as a mother, you hear still comments, "Oh, you're working such late hours, poor kid," and they are more specifically directed towards women than towards men. So I think these sort of biases in society still need to be addressed.
Valeria?
Well, I have to say, I wouldn't be here without the European Union support. It's been just very, very easy as that. Just from the very early stage, I got my degree in chemistry. I'm Sicilian, from Catania. And I got a position to start a PhD in Ireland in Trinity College at the School of Physics, supported by the European Union. It was a Marie Curie grant. Everything started from there. A few years after getting my PhD, I moved to the University of Oxford with a Marie Curie Inter-European Fellowship. And there I started my first few steps as an independent scientist. And then 5 ERC grants came along, a starting grant, 3 proof of concept grants, a consolidator grant. I think it's fair to say that I wouldn't be here without the European Union support. I wouldn't be at the level I'm. Of course, what we were saying before, there are some step changes to be done still. But I think what we have come across has been a lot, actually. Women today can do science, can do great science. They have support to do great science. What we need to improve, perhaps, is the societal perception. We need to do a step change for what the Commissioner was mentioning before. I have loads of young female scientist students, undergrads, that are seeing me as an inspirational model. I want to see many of them coming to the next step, to the PI stage, to the professor stage. In Trinity, for example, at the age of 36, I got promoted to chair level. And I think this is something in Trinity was unheard of, in fact. At the School of Chemistry, I was the first chair, woman chair, since the foundation in 1592. So things are changing. We just need to make sure that that becomes the common practice.
So these issues that have been raised, are they less of an issue in your generation now?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that, of course, I felt the support of the European Union in a way that's in no way comparable to how you two felt. I think for me, it was mostly in contests. The European Union contest for young scientists, for example, was a big step. It was the time when I decided I just couldn't give it up. That I wanted to keep doing research for my career. I wanted to keep this project after I was done with high school. I wanted to keep it up. And I think it's very important to encourage people, to encourage young people especially. Because I don't think many people, when they're my age or younger, they think about becoming scientists or innovators. They always want to be engineers, or they want to be they want to be doctors. No one, you can't ask a child and they say, "Oh no, I want to be an innovator." No one will say that. So I've never really felt like people looked at me differently because I was a woman in a group with two other men. We all had the same opportunities. We all worked the same. We all talked the same in front of the judges. I never felt like I was being judged differently. And I'm really glad that my generation has come that far and that we can be perceived as equals, even though I belonged to a group that we were three. I was the only girl, and I never felt differently, and I'm very glad for that.
And that's good to hear. Agnieszka, I understand that you've been looking at some of these gender issues in your actual line of research on artificial intelligence and robotics. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think it's a very important topic. We know that there's evidence now that there are some implicit biases in artificial intelligence that are gender-related or race-related. So we need to make sure that those biases don't happen, and it's not an easy task, of course. Me, myself, I don't work on artificial intelligence. I work on the human side and human-robot interaction. And of course, we need to look at gender issues there because our aim at the end of the day is to create robots that would enter our society on a daily life, that would assist us in elderly care, health care, child care. And what we focus on is what I call the social attunement, so that the robots are well attuned to the needs of the user. And those needs are different, dependent on, for example, gender, also other individual differences, and all that needs to be taken into account. So we always look into whether gender plays a role in reception of a robot, in reception of a certain behavior, of physical appearance. And actually we have found differences in, for example, attribution of human likeness and kind of, as I said, reception of how pleasant it is to interact with a robot. And these things need to be taken into account, of course, because if we want those robots to then help the elderly, then they need to be tailored to those needs. So it's a little bit different perspective than what I started talking about in terms of biases in artificial intelligence, but that is something that we definitely need to address in studies like ours.
Francisca, you had a very innovative idea of using algae to clean a contaminated soil, which apparently impressed the jury significantly. How did you come up with that idea?
That's quite an interesting story, actually. It all started 4 years ago when me and two friends of mine and a teacher who's nothing less than a Wonder Woman, really. We had a subject at school called Project Investigation Methodologies. So we were encouraged to try and develop a project the same way we would outside as adults, as someone with a PhD or a master's degree. And my teacher always worked a lot with algae. She loved it. She would love getting up early and going to the beach with us to pick up algae. And we had a lecture a few days before that about the economy in Portugal, about, for example, chestnuts. We targeted our research especially to chestnuts, because to those who aren't familiar with the Portuguese economy, 50% of all the chestnuts produced in Portugal are for exportation. The other 50%, unfortunately, are destroyed by the pathogen we tried to eradicate. So we figured, if there are proven links between symbiosis with algae and plants, maybe there's a way that this algae will work on the pathogen. And we only went to contests last year, maybe a year and a half ago, because we wanted to develop the project to the point where when people asked us questions, we had considered most of them. And I think contests was really important for us because it helped us develop the project. It helped us find new perspectives. And it was just an idea that came out of nowhere. We had no idea if it would work, but thankfully we did.
Very exciting. Now, Valeria, sometimes there's a recurrent analysis that is made, including by the European Commission, that Europe is very good at fundamental research and science, but we're not that good at bringing that innovation to market. So what's your personal experience in that area?
My personal experience is that fundamental science actually can often lead to applied science. And I think my experience is this, and this is what happened to me. I had a starting grant on developing very, very basic aspects of science on nanomaterials. And the grant was very, very fundamental, actually. My idea was fundamental studies. That nevertheless led to many discoveries along the 5 years of my starting grant. And that has further led to 3 proof of concept grants, for example, which led to commercialization. So actually aspects of my research have been patented, have been licensed, and I cannot, for non-disclosure agreements, I cannot say who I licensed to, but I can say that my fundamental research found applications on automotive industry, toys industry, telecommunication, and smart technology. These are just a few of the licenses we gave. So I'm strongly believing that fundamental science is a stepstone, is something very, very much key. Because without fundamental science, we are actually out of the pipeline to produce applied science. One thing cannot exclude the other, actually.
Good. We've looked back quite a bit at the past 20 years. So what about the next 20 years? Question to all of you. Where do we want to be in 20 years, and what are the main challenges to get there in terms of completely gender-neutral research environment?
Well, I guess, as I mentioned earlier, we need to address these still remaining challenges that are more societal on a day-to-day basis, and we need to have role models for sure, but we also need to have those day-to-day heroes, as I say, people who encourage women. These are teachers, these are mothers who encourage their daughters. These are fathers who who take parental leave, and I think it's very, very important on a kind of like more, as I say, day-to-day basis to change a little bit of this still remaining societal pressure on girls to be more active at home, for example, with the kids, and take only 50% positions because they need to be there at home with their kids, and that pressure is not there for the fathers. So I think that needs to definitely be addressed still, and otherwise I think we should just keep on going as we're doing now, and to see this progress going on.
Any other views?
Well, I think I would like to get away from quotas, because I would like just us to be there naturally in 20 years' time. So I would like not to be having it written that 40% of the committee has to be female, but I actually want that happens naturally. And we have a long way to go. I think this is great that now these quotas are in place, because we're giving a different perspective to different roles. But I think that in 20 years' time, this should be the natural practice. And there is a lot to do. There is certainly a lot to do along the way. There is more infrastructure that needs to be in place as well. Women need to feel supported also in their work environment. This is basically what is needed.
I think we need to consider the gender bias that doesn't come to mind immediately. For example, in medical research, most papers that are written about the treatments or the drugs used to a certain type of disease, they're all on men, or they're not gender specific.
Yep.
So we need to stop. I mean, it's been proved that men and women are different in many ways and need differentiated treatment. So why do we keep researching things that will work for men and just assume it will be the same for women? Yeah. Most of all, I think we need to consider the gender bias that doesn't come to mind immediately. And I think that comes from three things mostly: sponsorship, mentorship, and scholarship. Sponsorship, as in, like Valeria said, even though in 20 years I hope we don't need to have 40% women in a certain place, we need gender-specific studies. We need studies that are targeted for women or targeted for men, or that study the difference between the two. Mentorship is just what we've been saying since the beginning. We need role models. We need people who don't conform to this gender bias, who try to break this wall. And scholarship, just trying to target people at my age, a little younger, just to think besides the point, think outside the box. Try not to do the same mistakes people have made in the past.
Carlos, as commissioner and father, what do you see in 20 years?
Three, and two girls and a boy. No, just a couple of comments. I think that what Francisca said is so important. I mean, one of the examples that is extremely striking is about heart attacks. Exactly. So the way women have the symptoms of having a heart attack is very different from a man. And so you really have to do studies that differentiate that. The same about diseases that today, like autism and Asperger's syndrome, where you know that the symptoms in girls sometimes go unnoticed because you kind of think she's more quiet or she's more in her corner and she's studying. And so there's something there, but you don't really figure out until late. So there's a lot of young girls that are diagnosed with autism or Asperger's syndrome later because no one noticed the symptoms in the right way. So that is extremely important. And having someone of your age already with that thinking process, I think is great that you raised that point. Then on the quotas, Christine Lagarde not long ago said that she never believed in quotas, but that she was changing her mind. And the reason that she was changing her mind was because if you don't put quotas, then it would take us 300 years. And I agree with you that I mean, it would be so good that everything would happen naturally. But the question is that if it's naturally, it's probably takes so long. And so probably, yes, push. We did always here in the Commission the targets, but I sometimes wonder if quotas would also not be essential, especially in the questions of meetings, of panels. You cannot put quotas on excellence because, I mean, you would be, I mean, you are the ERC grantees, so you would be, I mean, that would be unfair for you and for everyone. So it's not that I'm talking, but so, yes, I think that we have to think about it to try to accelerate the process with all the goods and the bads. But I think that we have to think about it. And then I mean, there was a couple of comments you made that also I thought about. One is that look at my colleagues, right? I remember at the beginning, people would talk to some of my colleagues that are women, and they say, "Oh my God, how do you do with this all traveling?" And by the way, our high representative for external affairs is Federica Mogherini, and she has young kids. And people would ask her, "So how do you do with the kids?" And I mean, they would not ask me. And we would comment that as like, I mean, it's almost funny. I mean, because we have the same problem, right? Yeah. Because my wife also travels, so we have to juggle, and we have the same level of responsibility. And I think that then, you know, I always loved, I think the best book I've read was the memoirs of Madeleine Albright. And she's a very inspiring woman and very inspiring politician. And she, in her book, describes the times at the White House. And there's one thing that she says that I think is right. When you are a woman and you are establishing your career path is different from men, right? And so how can we help from the Commission on that? And so we had this idea that we're discussing with the Parliament, but the Marie Curie grants have it already, which is to have restarting grants. So imagine that you have a baby, and then you go and you spend a year off. How can I get you back to a grant, right? Because if I don't do that, then you will not come back. But also you have to change mentalities. And the other story I wanted to tell was about a meeting I had a couple of years ago, like last year. I was in Norway, and I was with the minister then of education, which I don't remember the name. And, I mean, it is a man. And he said to me, "Look, glad that you came because now my wife is pregnant. We are about to have a kid, and I'm going to take 6 months off." And I said, "But you're a minister. Are going to do? You're going to take 6 months off?" And he said to me something that still comes to my mind. He said, "Look, if I don't take the 6 months off, nobody will vote for me again in my constituency." And then wow. So, you know, so the social pressure also is important. You know, the social pressure in that case in Norway was, look, you're having a baby, your wife stops, you stop. And if you don't do it, you're not a good citizen, right? Yeah. And, you know, I'm exaggerating, of course, and he was also probably exaggerating the point. But it's important also to talk about it. And, you know, that's why these kind of things that we're doing here today are important. And there should more of that, where you talk, you tell the stories, and you change the attitude. And it takes time. So I think that is a little bit of everything we said. And then to push it a little bit. And then we will get there at some point. But, you know, I have two daughters, and I really feel that I'll be so upset if I feel that they don't have the same opportunities as my boy. I think that will be very unfair. And so there's also this thing that I think Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, came on the first time saying, "I'm a feminist," right? And I mean, of course, is a statement, and especially from a prime minister, quite strong. But it's important that men also are involved in the discussion. And so when you have your panels and when you talk about it, it's important to have men on board and not just like discussing in between yourselves. Having your colleagues and your peers that, as you said, were very good and everything went well. Why don't they get also involved in these discussions? Bring them on. And I think that is also essential for the future of politics, because if not, we'll not gonna get there. So, Lucia, that's my advice is not good, but this is just my experience of what I've seen in the past years.
Thank you. So one last question to you all. You've all spoken a lot about the importance of role models. So if you were to develop a biography for Wikipedia or another outlet or media of a woman researcher, innovator, who would you pick?
Oh, I'd have to go with Dr. Marta Moita. She's a researcher at Champalimaud, and I have been obsessed with her work lately. She is an ERC grantee. She's studying the fight or flight response on fruit flies, depending on social context. And she is the most down-to-earth person I've ever heard an interview from. I mean, from minute one, I was hooked to her interview. So if I really had to develop a Wikipedia page for someone, I'd have to pick her.
Okay.
I don't know. It's a very tough question, actually, to answer. Because, actually, I picked something that the commissioner said a few years ago, when we met in occasion of an ERC event, and it was the 10th anniversary of the ERC, and they basically said for scientists that we needed to be more vocal, and more so for women, I think. Not very many people know what we do and what we achieve, and so there's probably picking one is not enough. What I can tell you is that probably I should start working on my page.
Yeah, you know, I mean, this year, so I was at the ceremony for the Nobel Prizes, and one of the Nobel Prizes this year was a woman called Donna Strickland, right? And she told me herself the story, which I read, but I didn't know was true or not, that so she tried to put a page on Wikipedia, and the page was refused for several times. And the associates that were working for her, that were men, had already a page on Wikipedia. That says it all, right? And so, you know, a woman that actually makes it up to be Nobel Prize, she was not a full professor. She didn't have a page on Wikipedia because it was refused. You know, and you ask questions. And so I came across a story that also she told me at the time, that now there's a young researcher, I think at the Imperial College, called Jess Wade, that is writing pages about women. And in the last year, she did almost 300 pages in the Wikipedia. So I think that the same way that I told that you have to participate, I think, why don't you, Francisca, go and write something about Valeria and Agnieszka, and you do it. Because at the end of the day, what happens is because Wikipedia is about referrals and about people that write, and most are men, so probably you need more women putting it. And you insist, you do once, at some point it will work. So I think that the Wikipedia example is a very good example. The danger that we have in the next couple of years, which is biased data, right? And that comes to your work, Agnieszka, in terms of that. So how do you go to a world of artificial intelligence where most of the data come from men? Or from, probably white males from 30 to 45 years old, and not from women and minorities and different cities around the world. So we have to think about it, and we have to do something about it. If not, the results can be very bad for all of us.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for this very personal and inspiring debate. It's been, I'm not a scientist, but I almost wish I had paid more attention in chemistry class at school. And Commissioner, I'll leave you the role of closing this discussion.
No, not to me. I think you should close it. I think that is up to you. I mean, you should close it. I mean, I just you know that you can count on me on this journey, and I feel kind of somehow proud of the Commission of what we've done, and I just wanted to ask you to keep, like everywhere you go, talk about Europe and the role of Europe. But why don't you like the last word, like starting here? And yet, like, I'm doing the moderator now. Just very quick, 2 words or 3 words.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here today, and it's a great honor. And I'm extremely grateful to Europe for what Europe is doing for us, and to the ERC for, as I already mentioned, for funding our dream research. And I hope we can continue on this great journey and progress in the way we're doing.
Same here. I'm really, really grateful for Europe's support, actually, what has started and what it's doing for my career. But I'm also very, very proud to be a role model within my own institution, for example. I'm tirelessly advising younger students, for example, or peers, PIs that are starting to come up in the role of academia and research and innovation. I do in my little what I try to do what is best, meaning advising people and showing them it's possible. It's possible to achieve higher positions, and yeah, women can do it as well as men, and that's what I do every day in my own institution.
Well, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here. It's really been a huge honor to be with people who obviously know a lot more about this than me. I want to tell everyone, especially girls, girls need to be encouraged to go to science, to do science, to get their hands dirty. And I'm very thankful for the opportunities I've had so far, and I hope I have a lot more in the future.
Thank you all, and so we'll be looking out for your Wikipedia pages shortly. Thank you.